Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. It's even chilly here in Florida. So hopefully everybody's having a good weekend. And I have to admit the 50-degree weather is kind of a nice reprieve from sometimes always having heat. Because, I used to live up north, so I have clothes that I never get to wear anymore. But anyway, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the questions that I have been getting through some of our athletes on our Superfly community, and I thought this would be really a good topic to discuss. Cycling cadence. We've talked a lot about run cadence, and I know that a lot of people have adapted some of the tips that I've given them on the run cadence, and it's worked really well. So we haven't talked about cycling cadence though, because the topic I don't want to say is a little bit more broad, but I will say it's a little less easy to answer because cycling cadence and what is optimal for each person is definitely unique to each person as well. So you want to spend some time making sure that you find your optimal cycling cadence. And there are some tests and things that you can eventually do that you can try to figure that out by simply doing some riding at certain various cadences, seeing what average power you can hold, tracking your heart rate relative to that, getting off the bike, running, because you not only want to have a good bike split, right, but you want to be able to get off the bike and run really well. A couple of things that I would say though, I find that traditionally a lot of athletes feel like they have to have a 90 plus cadence no matter what, or they're not doing something right. That's not necessarily the case, and it really depends also on what distance you're riding too. So, like the Ram racers, for example, they'll ride at an average cadence of 50, where a lot of times the ITU very short course athletes will ride 95, 100 plus. There's definitely a rule of cadence meeting effort. So kind of like running, you have to turn the gear and you have to turn a bigger gear. Those are the two things that you can kind of control. So with that in mind, if you're going super hard, a lot of times in order to sustain that muscularly, you have to increase your cadence. But there's a big difference, and the hardest thing that I have trouble explaining to that's not the right. So the thing that I have to explain to athletes the most is there's a difference between grinding and riding at a slow cadence. So if you are riding at a slow cadence, but your legs are relaxed, we've all had like those days where maybe we're riding next to each other, talking after a hard ride, and you're riding really easy at a very slow cadence, but your legs are very relaxed. Just because you're riding at a slow cadence doesn't mean that that's a very strenuous exercise for your legs, right? So I've always said there's a big difference between like torque and big gear work. So you really want to make sure that you're clear on which one you're talking about, right? So if you're riding at a low cadence, for example, for Ironman, let's say it's a hotter day and you're riding at a low cadence and you're grinding, trying to maintain speed, you're probably setting yourself up for a bad result. But if you're up to speed and you can put it into a harder gear and keep your legs relaxed and smooth and your speed up, then that might not be a bad thing. And you actually are probably going to let your heart rate come down because you're not moving as much. And you're also going to have less heat and energy expense because you have less movement. So you want to kind of think about what's best for you, and you want to kind of figure out yours. I know that the answer is not super clear. You can ask us in the triathlete community. It's a free group. If you have something specific, or even if you want us to check out some of your files and that kind of stuff, we could kind of take a look at that there for you. But I would say in general, you want to make sure that no matter what it is you like to do, you continue to have all the tools in your toolbox that you possibly can. So if you find that you like to ride at a lower cadence, you want to make sure that you're doing things like spin-up drills where you can learn how to neuromuscularly talk to your muscles really quick through your brains by moving very quick. You want to work that up to the point that you start bouncing on your seat. And the reason that the bouncing on the seat is a significant thing is because what that's telling you is your legs aren't relaxing enough quickly enough. So as your foot comes down at the bottom of the pedal stroke, because you're not relaxing, you're effectively still pushing, and that pedal is a fixed place. Your legs are going to push you up. So a lot of times the spin up drill is teaching you how to teach your muscles how to relax a little bit or very quickly as well too, and firing that sequence. So if you're bouncing, that's probably the issue. Let's see, I have notes as always because I want to always make sure I don't think about things. Or I don't forget to think about things. So the big gear work or the torque work, I know that I'm getting ready to go do that myself right now. I really like to do that simulated on a hill You can do an aero if you don't hurt your knees. If obviously it hurts your knees, that's not a good thing. But for me, when I'm doing my torque work, a lot of times it can even be zone 2 work, but I'm trying to think about really getting full activation through the entire pedal stroke and working on engaging and recruiting those muscles. A lot of times for me, that can still be an aerobic exercise. One of the things that I've done even indoors, and I know a lot of people are riding indoors right now, is I'll make little pyramids for myself. So again, I think I've talked about this in the past. I know that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is 15, right? So if I did 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, I know that that would be a 15-minute set. So if you're riding indoors and you have like an aerobic ride, just like if you were riding outside, your coach, or I wouldn't tell my athlete, like if they're riding outside, make sure you hit this many hills, make sure that you don't do this. You know, you can change up the workout that you're doing indoors just as if you were riding outside. It doesn't have to be so structured as long as you're staying within the confines of the workout. So when I used to have, you know, like a 2-hour or a 3-hour indoor ride, it would be mentally really boring. So I would do things like, okay, like when I'm watching football, if my team has the ball, I'm going to do some big gear, low RPM work. If the other team has the ball, I'm going to spin normal. You know, if it's a commercial break, maybe I'll stand, right? So, I mean, throw those types of things in there as well. But the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, a lot of times I'll do like, okay, I'm going to do 5 minutes big gear seated, 5 minutes big gear standing, and then 5 minute easy to spin. And if I did that, 5, 5, 5, 4, 4, 4, 3, you know, it's a 45-minute set. So if I warmed up for 15 minutes and then I did that set, you know, it makes it super easy. And I never had to think longer than 5 minutes down the road, right? No pun intended. The other thing that I'd want you to really think about too, and this is kind of what was the precipice of this thought, was I was being asked, what's the difference between having like a structured file, like a trainer road type thing, and riding free mode, right? The difference to me, and there's a place for both, is when the workout is being given to you. A lot of these programs, it only is measuring how fast that drum is going, and depending on how fast that drum is going on your freewheel dictates how much stress it puts on that drum. So if your cadence starts to drop, the only way that it can keep you at that goal wattage that you told it you want to be at is to increase the resistance. The problem is if your cadence drops enough, it's going to keep increasing that to the point literally I've been standing still on my pedals before. So I do think that it's a little artificial. It's hard to do big gear work when you're having the workout dictated to you, because by definition, when you are trying to move your pedals slow to do that aerobic exercise that we were just talking about, the machine or the mechanism is going to be making that torque so incredibly hard, it's going to be impossible to kind of achieve that aspect of the workout if you can even continue to turn the cranks. So on things like that, I do feel like free ride mode, or like finding one of these programs that you can do simulated outside rides, that would be better. And then also there's times too where I tend to like a little bit lower cadence when I ride. I would usually ride mid to lower 80s for my half Ironmans and less. But I would then pick some of these hard workouts in order to force me to keep my cadence up at that speed, because it puts on a different cardiovascular demand too, right? And so way back when I started to kind of wrap this up, I used to think about it in the simplest possible terms, where I have a heart, right, which is my cardiovascular system, and I had my legs. I know that's not true, which was my muscular system. And so when I was doing my races, I would try to balance those two things. So if I started to get really out of breath, sometimes I would put it into a harder gear and let my muscles take over for a little bit and try to let my breathing calm down. If my legs were getting super hard, you know, fatigued, I would try to put it in an easier gear to keep my speed up, to let my cardiovascular system bail my legs up for a little bit. And I would try to balance that back and forth a little bit. And I would really try to dial in how it felt to be in the optimal power, even though back, you know, in the early 90s, I didn't realize I was riding to power. I just knew I was riding to that speed. But you really try to dial in what that feels like, and that's going to help you control your power in your races better than staring at your power meter. Because if anybody has a power meter knows, if you stare at it, it's impossible to hold it smooth. So really try to focus on what that feels like. The last thing here's my other tip. You know, as I'm getting older and semi kind of retiring from racing, I'm giving more and more tips. When I would think about my efforts, even when I was going really hard on the bike, in my mind, I would always put a mechanical system in my mind. So I would think about my legs being mechanical, and I would be lining up those levers in order to keep that motion going, versus me muscling through that pedal stroke, right? So even when I was going really, really hard, I would try to relax my legs. And again, this is just my word pictures that I'm sharing with you. I would try to keep my muscles loose around the bones and try to keep them as relaxed as possible and try to keep that mechanical lever system going back and forth, back and forth. And that would allow me to not be tense and really try to keep my body, focused on what it needed to be doing and not wasting extra energy just being tense, So if we sat here even at our chair and we were really, really tense, it'd be exhausting after a little bit. So we would never want to ride or run or swim. And that's why I've talked about in the swimming and stuff, to be relaxed, because if you're super tense, that causes energy to just drain almost really, really fast. So those are my tips for the weekend. Try it out. Try the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And even like I've started with 6, because if you throw 3 6s in there, that's another 18 minutes or, whatever. So have some fun with it. And I hope everybody has a great weekend, and I will talk to you next week.